I used to think family meant unconditional belonging, even when the welcome mat had been pulled from under your feet years ago. That Thanksgiving, as I stood outside my son Richard's house, watching through the window as they carved the turkey. Without me, I realized some doors aren't meant to be knocked on. They're meant to be owned. The text message came 3 days before Thanksgiving. "Mom, we're keeping it small this year, just immediate family." I read it twice, my coffee going cold between my hands. Immediate family. As if I, who had carried Richard for 9 months and raised him alone for 18 years, had somehow become distant. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. As if the woman who had emptied her retirement account to help with his down payment was now merely an acquaintance. I didn't respond immediately. What could I say? That I had already bought the cranberry sauce with less sugar because his wife, Vanessa, complained about the sweetness last year? That I'd spent weeks knitting a soft blue blanket for my granddaughter Lily's new bedroom? That this would be the first Thanksgiving since Robert, my husband of 30 years, had passed away? The morning wind cut sharply as I pulled my coat tighter. November in Portland brought the kind of cold that settled in your bones. The kind that reminded you of every year you'd lived and every loss you'd endured. I'd driven across town to drop off Lily's gift anyway. "I won't stay," I had practiced saying. "I just wanted to give this to her before the holiday." But I never made it to the door. Through the bay window, I could see them all gathered around the dining table. Richard, Vanessa, their 2 children, Vanessa's parents, and even her brothers. Family. Immediate family. The words echoed in my head as I watched Vanessa's mother pass the gravy boat to Richard, their laughter floating like smoke through the glass. I had been erased. Not just forgotten, deliberately excluded. As I stood there, an unexpected clarity washed over me. This wasn't about a dinner. This was about power, about who belonged and who decided. I had spent my life being useful, the emergency babysitter, the interest-free loan provider, the silent supporter who never complained. I had made myself small to fit their definition of a good mother, one who gives everything and asks for nothing. I drove home that day with a resolve I hadn't felt in decades. Robert had left me well provided for, despite Richard's assumptions, about my fixed income. My late husband had been shrewd with investments, and as his office manager for 20 years, I'd learned more than anyone suspected about financial leverage. The next morning, I called Martin, our family attorney since Richard was in college. "Elaine," he said, his voice warm with sympathy. "How are you holding up? First Thanksgiving without Robert must be tough." "I need information, Martin," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "About Richard's mortgage. Who holds it? What the terms are, and whether it's possible for a third party to purchase it." A pause. "Elaine, are you sure? I've never been more certain of anything in my life." He sighed. "Come by the office tomorrow. We'll talk options." That night, as rain tapped against my bedroom window, I pulled out old photo albums. There was Richard at 5, gap-toothed and beaming as I helped him build his first science project. Richard at 16, accepting an academic award while I stood proudly in the audience, having worked double shifts that month to pay for his college application fees. Richard on his wedding day, Vanessa radiant beside him, while I adjusted his boutonniere with trembling hands. I traced the timeline of our relationship through these frozen moments, searching for the exact point where I had transitioned from essential to optional. Was it when Vanessa decorated their first home without a single item I had offered? When my suggestions for Lily's name were politely dismissed? Or was it more gradual, a slow erosion of my place in his life until I became something easily discarded when inconvenient? The following week, Martin called with news. "It's possible," he said cautiously. "Their mortgage was sold to an investment group last year. They're willing to sell the note, but it's not cheap, Elaine." "How much?" He named a figure that would consume nearly half of my savings. "Do it," I said without hesitation. "Elaine," Martin's voice softened, "this won't give you what you're looking for. You can't buy your way back into their lives." I clutched the phone tighter. "I'm not trying to buy my way in, Martin. For once, I'm acknowledging the truth. I was never really welcome in the first place." December arrived with its particular brand of forced cheer. Christmas lights blinked from neighboring houses, and holiday cards began appearing in my mailbox. None from Richard. I received the final paperwork from Martin 2 weeks before. Christmas. I was now effectively Richard's landlord, though he didn't know it yet. The investment had been significant, but it came with something I hadn't possessed in years: leverage. Not to force my way back into their lives, Martin was right about that, but to ensure they could never again pretend I didn't exist. To make certain that every mortgage payment would be a reminder of my presence. I hired a locksmith for December 23rd, while intelligence gathered from Lily's school calendar confirmed the family would be at her holiday concert. The man worked quickly, replacing every exterior lock on the house I now technically owned. As he finished, I handed him an envelope with his payment and a generous holiday tip. "The new keys, ma'am?" he asked, extending a small packet toward me. I took them, feeling their weight in my palm. "Thank you." That evening, I sat at my kitchen table and composed a letter. Not a rant, not a litany of grievances, but a clear statement of facts. I wrote about the sacrifices I had made, the support I had provided, and the respect I had been denied. I detailed the mortgage purchase and explained that new arrangements would need to be made. I signed it simply Elaine, not Mom or Mother. Those titles had been stripped from me when I became not immediate family. I placed the letter in an envelope along with a single new key and drove back to Richard's house. The property looked different to me now, not as a home I had been excluded from, but as an asset I controlled. I slipped the envelope through the mail slot and returned to my car. As I pulled away from the curb, I caught sight of my reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back at me wasn't broken or bitter. She was reclaiming something essential: her dignity. For too long, I had allowed my worth to be determined by others' willingness to make space for me at their table. No more. What happened next would change everything between us. But regardless of how Richard responded, I had already experienced the most important transformation within myself. I was no longer waiting for an invitation to belong in my own family's story. I was writing my own. 2 months before that fateful Thanksgiving, life had settled into a predictable rhythm. My mornings began with coffee on the porch Robert and I had built together, afternoons filled with volunteer work at the community library, and evenings spent either alone or occasionally with my friend Margaret, who lived 3 doors down. Widowhood had reshaped my days, but I had adjusted as best I could. Robert's absence still felt like a physical space beside me, a depression in the mattress that never quite regained its shape, an empty chair at the breakfast table where the morning light fell just so. But I had learned to live alongside this emptiness rather than be consumed by it. My relationship with Richard and his family had already begun its subtle deterioration long before Robert's passing. Our interactions had become increasingly transactional over the years. I was the emergency babysitter when their plans changed, the extra pair of hands during home renovations, the convenient stopgap when budgets ran tight. "Mom, can you watch the kids next weekend? Vanessa's college friend is having a dinner thing," Richard would call, always last minute, always expecting my calendar to be empty and waiting. "Of course," I'd say, rearranging whatever plans I might have had. On a Tuesday in early October, I drove to their suburban development. Identical houses with different colored doors stretching down manicured streets. Richard and Vanessa had the green door, a choice Vanessa had made to stand out from the boring neutrals of their neighbors. I parked in the driveway, noting how the garden beds I'd helped plant in spring had been replaced with decorative gravel and ceramic pots. Lily, now 7, burst through the door before I could knock. Grandma, I lost another tooth. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She grinned widely, displaying the gap with pride. That's wonderful, sweetheart, I said, bending down despite my knees protesting. I presented her with a small paper bag. I brought some books I thought we might read together. Vanessa appeared in the doorway, phone pressed to her ear, mouthing a quick, "Thank you," before turning back inside. She was dressed for her real estate showing. Sleek black dress, pearls that had once belonged to her grandmother, hair styled in what she called her professional blowout. Richard emerged from his home office just long enough to say, "Thanks." "Mom, there's pizza money on the counter. We'll be back around 9. Then he was gone, briefcase in hand, Vanessa's voice trailing behind him. "If we're late for this reservation, they'll give our table away." The door closed, and suddenly, the house belonged to me and the children. 4-year-old Noah toddled in from the playroom, hands sticky with something purple. "What are we making, buddy?" I asked, kneeling to his level. "Slime," he answered seriously. "But it's not working." I spent the next hour cleaning the purple concoction from various surfaces, helping Lily with spelling homework, and eventually ordering the pizza, which I paid for myself when I realized the pizza money was exactly $5 short of the total. While the children ate, I wandered through the living room, noticing how thoroughly my presence had been erased from their home. The family photos on the mantel showed vacations I hadn't been invited to join, holidays where my gifts had been received with polite acknowledgement but never displayed. The only evidence of me was a small clay pot Lily had made in kindergarten, inscribed "For Grandma" in wobbly letters, now repurposed as a holder for Vanessa's essential oil diffuser sticks. I opened the hall closet looking for extra napkins and discovered a box labeled "Mom's Things" pushed to the back corner. Inside were the birthday cards I'd sent, the hand-knitted scarf Richard had never worn, photo albums I'd carefully assembled of Lily's first years. All neatly contained, all hidden away. That night, after the children were asleep, I sat in their perfectly staged living room, surrounded by furniture chosen to impress rather than comfort. I thought about my own home, modest but filled with evidence of a life lived fully. The quilt Robert's mother had made for our wedding, the bookshelf overflowing with well-read paperbacks, the kitchen where 40 years of family meals had been prepared. When Richard and Vanessa returned at nearly 11, not 9, they seemed surprised to find me still awake. "Mom, you should have gone to bed," Richard said, loosening his tie. "We got caught up with Vanessa's clients. They wanted to see another property after dinner." "It's fine," I said, gathering my purse. The children were wonderful. Vanessa was already checking her phone. "Did Lily finish her spelling? Her teacher said she needs extra practice." "All done and tucked into her folder," I replied. Richard walked me to the door, handing me 2 20s. "For the pizza," he said, not meeting my eyes. We both knew it wasn't enough to cover what I'd paid, but I took it without comment. "Maybe you could come for dinner next Sunday?" I suggested. "I could make Robert's pot roast. The kids always love that." A flicker of something, guilt, impatience, crossed his face. "I'll check with Vanessa. We might have plans." As I drove home through the quiet streets, I realized they always might have plans. Always something, just vague enough to avoid commitment without outright rejection. I wasn't being excluded so much as gradually disappeared, my importance diluted drop by drop until I would eventually evaporate completely from their lives. At home, the silence felt different than it had that morning. It wasn't just Robert's absence I was feeling, but the slow, deliberate erasure of my significance to my only child. The realization settled in my chest, heavy and cold. I pulled out my calendar and began counting back through the months. The last time they had visited my home, 7 months ago, when Richard needed to borrow Robert's old tools. The last family dinner I'd been invited to, Christmas, and even then, they'd arrived late and left immediately after dessert. The last time Richard had called just to check in, without needing something, I couldn't remember. That night, I didn't cry. Something inside me had shifted from hurt to a quiet, simmering clarity. I had spent decades prioritizing my son's needs, his happiness, his convenience. And somewhere along that journey, I had inadvertently taught him that my presence was optional rather than essential. As I prepared for bed, I looked at the photo of Robert on my nightstand. "You always said I was too accommodating," I whispered, to his smiling face. Maybe it's time I stopped making everything so easy for them. I didn't know then how prophetic those words would become, or how completely our family dynamic was about to change. The catalyst came unexpectedly, 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, disguised as a routine bank notice. I was sorting through the day's mail when I found an envelope from Alliance Financial Group, the institution that had financed Richard and Vanessa's home purchase 4 years earlier. Inside was a letter addressed to me, as co-signer on the original mortgage agreement. I had almost forgotten that detail, how Richard had asked me to co-sign during a moment of financial uncertainty in his career, promising to refinance once his position stabilized. It was a temporary measure, he'd said, just until his commission structure improved. Payment delinquency notice, the letter stated in bold type. According to the document, their mortgage was 2 months behind, with a third payment now due. As co-signer, I was being informed before more serious collection actions began. My hands trembled slightly as I reread the notice. Richard's real estate development firm had just celebrated record sales according to his LinkedIn posts. Vanessa's luxury property listings regularly appeared in local magazines. Their vacation photos from Cabo San Lucas had populated my Facebook feed just last month. Vanessa in a new designer swimsuit, the children building elaborate sandcastles, Richard raising a colorful cocktail toward the camera. Yet here was evidence of financial trouble they had never mentioned, a problem they hadn't brought to me, despite my name being tied to their obligation. I called Richard immediately. "Hey, Mom, can I call you back?" "I'm heading into a meeting," he answered, his voice distracted. "I received a delinquency notice for your mortgage," I said, skipping the pleasantries. As co-signer, the silence that followed told me everything. Then, "Oh, it's just a temporary cash flow thing. We had to put money into Vanessa's car after the accident, and with the kids' private school deposits due..." His voice trailed off, then strengthened with familiar confidence. "It's handled, Mom. We made a payment yesterday." "The notice says you're 2 months behind, Richard." Another pause. "Look, it's embarrassing, okay? But it's our problem, not yours. I know how you worry about money since Dad died." The condescension in his tone was subtle but unmistakable. Poor Mom, still pinching pennies while we live the good life. If only he knew that Robert and I had methodically built a portfolio that had weathered market downturns and yielded consistent returns. That my fixed income included dividend payments that exceeded Richard's monthly salary. As co-signer, it becomes my problem when you miss payments, I said evenly. It affects my credit, my financial standing. I said we handled it, he replied, an edge creeping into his voice. "I've got to go. My clients are waiting." After he hung up, I sat at the kitchen table, the notice spread before me. Something about the interaction felt familiar. The dismissal of my concerns, the implication that I simply didn't understand their sophisticated financial situation. It mirrored countless other conversations where my input had been tolerated, rather than valued. That evening, I called Margaret and invited her for coffee. A retired financial advisor, she had helped Robert and me structure our investments years ago. Over blueberry scones and strong black coffee, I showed her the notice. "They're underwater," she said, after asking a few pointed questions about the property value and original purchase price. The market dipped in their area last year. They probably owe more than it's worth right now. But their lifestyle is probably financed with credit cards and home equity loans, Margaret finished, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. It's not uncommon, Elaine. People maintain appearances at all costs. He didn't even tell me, I said, quietly. And I'm legally responsible. Margaret covered my hand with hers. You have options. You can remove yourself as cosigner if they refinance, or... She hesitated. Or what? Or you could purchase the debt yourself. She held up a hand before I could respond. It's not as crazy as it sounds. Banks sell underperforming loans all the time, sometimes at a discount. Given your financial situation, you could afford it. Buy my son's mortgage? The idea seemed absurd at first mention. Think of it as protection for both of you. They keep their home. You control the debt instead of some faceless bank. And maybe... She looked at me knowingly. Maybe it would finally give you the leverage to have an honest conversation about where you stand with them. I left Margaret's house with a strange mixture of anxiety and possibility swirling in my mind. What she suggested wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming power in a relationship where I had systematically been rendered powerless. The next morning, I called Richard again. I'd like to help with the mortgage situation, I said when he answered. Mom, I told you it's handled. His voice was firm but guarded. I understand that. But as cosigner, I'd feel more comfortable if we could discuss your financial position. Perhaps over dinner this weekend? A beat of silence. This weekend is packed. Lily has soccer, and Vanessa's hosting a client appreciation event at the house. Next week, then? I persisted. It's important, Richard. He sighed, that familiar sound of barely contained impatience. Fine, I'll check with Vanessa and let you know. He never called back. Instead, 3 days later, I received a text message. Refinancing approved. Your name will be removed as cosigner. No need to worry anymore. No invitation to discuss. No acknowledgement of my willingness to help. Just another problem solved without my involvement. Another door quietly closed between us. That night, I made 2 calls. The first was to Margaret, asking for the name of a good real estate attorney. The second was to Martin, setting in motion what would become the most significant financial decision of my post-Robert life. As I placed the phone back in its cradle, I felt a strange calm descend. For years, I had been reaching out across an ever-widening gap, offering support, time, love, all while they steadily backed away. Now, for the first time, I would stop reaching. Instead, I would build a bridge of my own design, one they couldn't simply dismiss or avoid. I just didn't realize then how complete the transformation would be, or how the approaching holiday would crystallize everything into one inescapable moment of truth. The week after my conversation with Martin about purchasing the mortgage, I received an unexpected text from Vanessa. We're having a small pre-Thanksgiving get-together this Saturday. Just appetizers and wine, 5 p.m. The children would love to see you. The invitation arrived like a sudden break in clouds, surprising and, for a moment, warming. I read it 3 times, searching for the hidden agenda or obligatory tone I'd grown accustomed to. Finding none, I allowed myself a cautious optimism. Perhaps Richard had mentioned our aborted financial discussion. Perhaps they sensed my withdrawal and were making an effort to reconnect. Whatever the reason, I accepted immediately. I spent Friday afternoon preparing a homemade artichoke dip, Richard's favorite since childhood, and selecting a good bottle of Cabernet from the collection Robert and I had cultivated over the years. I even bought new earrings, small pearl drops that brightened my face and complemented the burgundy sweater I chose for the occasion. Saturday evening, I arrived at their house precisely at 5, my heart beating with a hope I hadn't felt in months. The front door was slightly ajar, laughter and conversation spilling onto the porch along with the scent of cinnamon and baking pastry. I knocked lightly before pushing the door open. Hello? The living room had been transformed. Thanksgiving. Decorations adorned every surface, artful arrangements of mini pumpkins, autumn leaves, and pillar candles creating a magazine-worthy display. Soft jazz played from hidden speakers, and the kitchen island was laden with an impressive spread of appetizers on matching ceramic platters. Vanessa emerged from the kitchen, wine glass in hand, looking perfectly put together in a cream cashmere, sweater, and dark jeans. "Elaine, you're right on time. Come in, come in." She air-kissed near my cheek, her perfume enveloping me momentarily. Richard appeared behind her, casual in a blue button-down and khakis, looking more relaxed than I'd seen him in months. "Hey, Mom, glad you could make it." He actually hugged me. A brief, one-armed embrace, but physical contact nonetheless. I presented the wine and dip, which Vanessa accepted with apparent delight. "Oh, your famous artichoke dip. Richard raves about this." I couldn't recall the last time Richard had mentioned anything about my cooking to Vanessa, but I smiled and allowed myself to be led further into the room. That's when I noticed we weren't alone. A middle-aged couple I didn't recognize sat on the sectional sofa, and an older man, perhaps in his 70s, stood examining the family photos on the mantel. "Mom, you remember the Petersons? From the neighborhood association?" Richard gestured to the couple, who smiled politely but with blank expressions that confirmed we'd never met. "And this," Vanessa continued, guiding me toward the older gentleman, "is Walter Camden. He just moved into the community last month." Walter extended his hand, his grip firm despite his age. "Pleasure to meet you, Elaine. Your son and daughter-in-law have been so welcoming to this old widower." "Nice to meet you." "Too," I replied, processing the situation. This wasn't a family gathering, it was a neighborhood social event. My special invitation was simply another last-minute thought, perhaps motivated by Walter's presence, an attempt to balance the gender ratio for their widowed neighbor. For the next hour, I participated in pleasantries, smiling through conversations about property values and school district rankings. I answered the expected questions about my late husband and deflected Walter's gentle attempts at deeper conversation with practiced grace. Lily and Noah made brief appearances, already in pajamas, giving perfunctory hugs before Vanessa's sister arrived to take them for a sleepover. "We thought they should have some cousin time," Vanessa explained as they left, though no one had mentioned this arrangement to me earlier. After they departed, Richard refilled wine glasses, and Vanessa brought out a fresh platter of bruschetta. "Mom was just telling me she's thinking of joining a travel group for seniors," Richard announced to the room, though I had mentioned no such thing. "Oh? Where are you planning to go?" Mrs. Peterson inquired politely. Before I could correct the misunderstanding, Richard continued, "She needs to get out more, meet new people." He looked meaningfully at Walter, who smiled back uncertainly. I felt heat rise in my cheeks. My son was matchmaking, attempting to pair his inconvenient widowed mother with the new widower down the street. The artichoke dip sat untouched near more photogenic appetizers. "Actually," I said calmly, "I've been quite busy with my volunteer work at the library and some financial planning projects." I turned slightly toward Walter. "Though travel is always enriching, have you done much since your retirement?" The conversation shifted, but the damage was done. I wasn't here as family. I was here as a problem they were attempting to solve, or, better yet, redirect toward someone else's life. As the evening progressed, I observed Richard and Vanessa in their element, the perfect hosts, refilling glasses, suggesting local restaurants, to Walter, discussing community board politics with the Petersons. They moved through their performance with practiced ease, each playing their role flawlessly. The successful young professional couple, the gracious hostess, the supportive husband, and I was cast as the slightly pitiable widow, a role they had assigned without my consent. When Vanessa mentioned their Thanksgiving plans, a catered meal for 14 people, including her entire family and some colleagues from Richard's firm, I waited for an invitation that didn't come, Instead, Richard topped off my wine and smoothly changed the subject. By 9 o'clock, I was mentally calculating my exit. The Petersons had already made noises about their babysitter's curfew, and Walter looked tired despite his evident enjoyment of Vanessa's attention. I stood, gathering my purse and the empty dish that had held the artichoke dip. This has been lovely, but I should be going. I have an early commitment at the library tomorrow. Oh, on Sunday? Vanessa looked surprised, perhaps not believing that a woman my age would have scheduled obligations. We're digitizing the local history collection, I explained, though I owed no explanation. Thank you for including me tonight. Richard walked me to the door, his hand lightly touching my elbow in a gesture that appeared solicitous but felt controlling. It was good to have you, Mom. You should get out more often. At the threshold, he lowered his voice. Walter seems nice. He mentioned he enjoys classical music, too. I looked at my son, this grown man who had once been the center of my world, and saw him clearly. Not as the child I had raised or the man I had hoped he would become, but as the person he actually was. Someone who viewed his mother as an item on a checklist, a responsibility to be managed or delegated. Richard, I said quietly, I'm not looking for companionship. I had a great love with your father. What I want is to be valued by the family. I already have. Something flickered across his face, discomfort perhaps, or a moment of genuine reflection, but it vanished quickly. Of course, Mom, we value you. That's why we want you to be happy. The patronizing tone said everything his words didn't. We value the idea of you being taken care of by someone else. As I drove home through the darkening evening, the false warmth of the gathering faded quickly. What remained was a crystalline understanding. I had been invited not as a mother or grandmother, but as a project. A loose end they were attempting to tie off neatly. By the time I reached my driveway, I had made my decision. The mortgage acquisition that had been merely an idea, a potential form of protection, now felt necessary. Not as revenge, but as recognition. As the only language they might finally understand. The following morning, I called Martin. I want to proceed, I said without preamble, with purchasing Richard's mortgage. Are you certain, Elaine? Once we start this process, I've never been more certain of anything, I interrupted. And Martin? I want it done quietly. No notifications until it's complete. As I hung up, I glanced at the calendar on my kitchen wall, where Thanksgiving was circled in red marker. Just 17 days away. 17 days until the holiday that was supposed to celebrate gratitude and family would instead become the backdrop for a reckoning none of us could have imagined. The mortgage acquisition process moved with surprising speed. Martin had connections at Alliance Financial Group, and my impeccable credit history combined with the ability to pay cash made me an attractive buyer for an underperforming loan. Within a week, preliminary paperwork was drawn up and awaiting final signatures. You'll be the note holder, Martin explained during our meeting in his wood-paneled office. You'll have all the rights of the original lender, including foreclosure in case of default. I flinched at the word foreclosure. I don't want to take their home, Martin. He leaned back in his leather chair, studying me. Then what do you want, Elaine? The question hung between us, deceptively simple, yet profound. What did I want? Not revenge. The thought of causing Richard real harm still made my stomach clench. Not reconciliation. Too many quiet dismissals had made clear that wasn't possible on terms that preserved my dignity. I want acknowledgement, I finally said. Recognition that I exist beyond what I can provide them. That I matter. Martin nodded slowly. Fair enough, but understand this. Simply owning their debt won't automatically change how they see you. That will require a direct confrontation. I know, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. And I'm preparing for that. The following Sunday, 10 days before Thanksgiving, I received an unexpected call from Lily. Grandma? Her voice was small, hesitant. "Can you come get me from soccer practice? Mom and Dad forgot and Coach has to leave." I was already reaching for my car keys. "Of course, sweetheart. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Where exactly is practice held?" After getting directions to the community fields, I drove through light rain, wondering how both Richard and Vanessa had forgotten their daughter's schedule. When I arrived, Lily sat alone on a bench under the field's small shelter, her soccer bag beside her. Mud splattered up her shins. "Thank you, Grandma," she said as she climbed into my car, her hair damp from the rain. Dad had a big listing appointment, and Mom's showing houses to important clients. "Important enough to forget you?" I thought but didn't say. Instead, I asked, "Have you had lunch yet?" She shook her head, and I took her to a small cafe near my home. Over grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, Lily gradually relaxed, telling me about her science project and the book she was reading for school. "Mommy and Daddy are fighting a lot," she said suddenly, dragging a French fry through ketchup without looking up. My heart tightened. "About what, honey?" She shrugged. "Money, I think. And Grandma Judith coming to stay with us for Thanksgiving." Grandma Judith, Vanessa's mother. The woman who had occupied the head of the table in my Thanksgiving window vision. "Grandma Judith doesn't like our house," Lily continued. "She says it's too small for what Daddy paid, and the kitchen needs updating." I managed a neutral, while processing this information. If Vanessa's mother was criticizing their home's value, it suggested the financial strain wasn't as resolved as Richard had claimed. "Are you coming for Thanksgiving?" Lily asked hopefully, looking up with Robert's eyes, the same warm brown that could always see straight through me. "I haven't been invited, sweetheart," I said gently. Her forehead wrinkled in confusion. "But your grandma," the simple logic of a child, so clear, so uncomplicated by adult pretense. "Sometimes grown-ups make choices that don't make much sense," I explained, "but it doesn't change how much I love you." After lunch, I texted Richard to let him know I had Lily. His response was immediate and brief. "Thanks. We'll pick her up from your place at 5. At 5:30, Richard's BMW pulled into my driveway. I had spent the afternoon helping Lily with her science project, a model of the solar system made from painted styrofoam balls and wire. It sat drying on newspaper spread across my dining room table. Richard came to the door alone, his expression a mixture of embarrassment and impatience. "Sorry we're late. Vanessa's showing went long." "It's fine," I said, stepping back to let him in. "Lily and I had a good afternoon. She's washing up." He glanced at the solar system model and frowned slightly. "You didn't need to do her project." "For her, Mom?" "I didn't. I helped. There's a difference." He made a non-committal sound and checked his watch. "We should get going. We have dinner reservations at 7. As Lily gathered her things, Richard wandered into my living room, his eyes landing on the folder of mortgage documents I'd left on the coffee table. The Alliance Financial Group logo was clearly visible on the top page. "What's this?" he asked, picking up the folder before I could stop him. "Are you refinancing?" I took a steadying breath. "Not exactly." He flipped the folder open, scanning. The first page with the professional quick read he'd developed in his business. His expression shifted from curiosity to confusion to something darker. "This has our address on it," he said, his voice low and tight. "Why do you have mortgage paperwork with our address?" Lily bounded back into the room, saving me from an immediate response. "Ready, Daddy. Grandma helped me make the coolest solar system model. Saturn has actual rings." Richard closed the folder with a snap, his eyes never leaving mine. "That's great, Lil. Go wait in the car for a minute, please. I need to talk to Grandma." After she left, he held up the folder. "What is this, Mom?" "It's exactly what it looks like," I replied calmly. "I'm purchasing your mortgage note from Alliance Financial." His face flushed. "You're what? Why would you? How could you?" He stopped, seemingly unable to form a coherent question through his shock. "You were behind on payments. As co-signer, I was at risk. This protects both of us. Protects? He nearly spat the word. This feels like the opposite of protection. It feels like surveillance or control. I met his gaze steadily. Interesting that those are the words that come to mind, not help or support, which is what I've always tried to provide. We don't need this kind of help, he said, tossing the folder back onto the coffee table. We're handling our finances just fine. The delinquency notices suggest otherwise. His jaw tightened. That was temporary. We've resolved it. By refinancing without telling me, despite my name being on the original loan. By removing me from the equation rather than including me in the solution. I kept my voice level, though my heart was racing. That seems to be a pattern, Richard. What's that supposed to mean? It means you accept my help when convenient but keep me at arm's length otherwise. It means I'm not invited to your Thanksgiving dinner despite having no other family. It means Lily was sitting alone in the rain today because neither you nor Vanessa prioritized her. He flinched at the last accusation. That was a miscommunication. Between us, it won't happen again. No, I agreed. It won't, because from now on, I'm not waiting to be remembered or included. I'm making my presence known. Richard stared at me like I'd transformed into someone unrecognizable. In some ways, perhaps I had. The accommodating mother who rearranged her life to fit their convenience was gone. You can't seriously be buying our mortgage, he finally said. It's inappropriate. The paperwork will be finalized next week. You'll receive official notification after Thanksgiving. I paused, then added, I thought you might prefer to hear it from me first. A car horn sounded from the driveway. Lily, impatient in the BMW. We're not done discussing this, Richard said, backing toward the door. No, I agreed. We're not. After they left, I sat in my quiet living room, my hands trembling slightly, as the adrenaline ebbed. The confrontation had been briefer than I'd anticipated, cut short by Lily's presence. But it had accomplished what I needed. The first crack in the wall of dismissal Richard had built around me. For the first time in years, he couldn't simply nod and forget. He couldn't placate me with vague promises or deflect with changing subjects. I had finally found a way to make my presence undeniable. I picked up the mortgage folder, tracing my fingers over the embossed logo. Inside was more than legal documentation. It was leverage, a tool to pry open the door I'd been knocking on for too long. What I would do once that door opened remained uncertain, but one thing was clear. Thanksgiving would not pass with my exclusion quietly accepted. Not this year. The Thursday before Thanksgiving arrived with a biting cold front that sent dead leaves skittering across my driveway. I had just finished my morning coffee when the doorbell rang with unusual insistence, multiple presses in quick succession. I opened the door to find Vanessa on my porch, her normally perfect appearance slightly disheveled. Her camel-colored coat was buttoned incorrectly, and wisps of hair had escaped her usually immaculate bun. We need to talk, she said without greeting, pushing past me into the entryway. I closed the door against the November chill. Good morning. To you too, Vanessa. She turned to face me, her expression a mix of anger and something that looked surprisingly like fear. Richard told me what you're doing, with our mortgage. Would you like some coffee? I asked, maintaining a calm I didn't entirely feel. This confrontation had been inevitable, but I hadn't expected Vanessa to be its vanguard. I don't want coffee, Elaine. I want an explanation. Her voice rose slightly. Do you have any idea how inappropriate this is? How invasive? I gestured, toward the living room. Let's sit down and discuss this rationally. She followed reluctantly, perching on the edge of my sofa while I took Robert's old armchair. A deliberate choice. It always made me feel stronger, as if some of his steady presence remained in the worn leather. This isn't about invasion, Vanessa. It's about protection, mine and yours. She gave a short, humorless laugh. Protection? You're buying our debt. How is that protecting anyone but yourself? I co-signed your original mortgage, I reminded her. When you fell behind on payments, it affected my financial standing. When you refinanced without telling me, you showed complete disregard for my involvement. That's business, not personal, she countered. We handled it. Everything is personal when it comes to family, I replied. Or at least, it should be. Vanessa crossed her arms, her wedding ring catching the morning light. The 3-carat diamond Richard had stretched to afford, another symbol of appearance over substance. Is that what this is about? You feeling left out? Her tone carried that familiar note of condescension. Because interfering with our finances isn't the way to get more attention, Elaine? The direct hit landed precisely as intended. I felt heat rise in my cheeks but kept my voice steady. This isn't about attention. It's about respect. Respect? She leaned forward. You want to talk about respect while going behind our backs to purchase our mortgage? That's rich. Was I supposed to consult you? The way you consulted me before, removing my name from the loan? Or before excluding me from Thanksgiving? The words came out sharper than I'd intended, the hurt finally breaking through my careful composure. Something flickered across Vanessa's face, perhaps surprise at my directness. We had spent years engaged in the polite fiction that everything was fine between us, that her systematic distancing of Richard from me was simply the natural order of things. Thanksgiving is just a dinner, she said, but with less certainty than before. No, it's not. It's a statement about who belongs and who doesn't. I paused, gathering myself. Do you know what Lily asked me on Sunday? She asked why I wasn't coming to Thanksgiving. She was confused because, in her words, but your grandma. Vanessa looked away, her fingers working at a loose thread on her coat sleeve. Children don't understand adult relationships or financial situations, but they understand family better than we do sometimes. She stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Outside, a neighbor walked his dog past my neatly maintained flower beds that Robert and I had planted together 20 years ago, and that I still tended each spring. We can't afford the payments, she said suddenly, her back still to me. Kai. Admission hung in the air between us, unexpected and heavy with implications. The refinance fell through, she continued, her voice softer now. The appraisal came in too low. We're underwater on the loan, and with the interest rates rising. She trailed off, then turned to face me. Richard didn't want you to know. He thought we could fix it before it became a real problem. Financial trouble isn't something to be ashamed of, I said. Especially with family. It is when you've built your entire reputation on success. Her laugh was brittle. Do you know what Richard does all day? He doesn't just sell houses. He sells the promise of a perfect life, the dream home, the perfect family, the financial stability. We're the living advertisement for what he's selling. For the first time, I saw beneath Vanessa's polished exterior to the exhausting performance beneath. The constant pressure to maintain appearances, to project, success even when drowning. So the trip to Cabo, I asked. Charged to credit cards were still paying off. She sank back onto the sofa. The private school tuition, the country club membership, the lease on my car. It's all built on projecting an image we can't actually afford. The revelation should have brought me satisfaction. Vindication that the life they'd prioritized over including me was partially a facade. Instead, I felt a complicated mixture of concern and sadness. Why not come to me? I could have helped. She gave me a long look. Because accepting help creates obligation. And Richard... She stopped herself. Richard what? Vanessa sighed. Richard has always felt that you help with strings attached, that every gift comes with expectations. The accusation stung, particularly because I recognized the kernel of truth within it. I had given freely, yes, but with the unspoken expectation of remaining essential in their lives. So instead of dealing with any perceived strings, I said carefully, you both chose to exclude me altogether. We chose independence, she corrected, or tried to. And now I own your mortgage. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Vanessa's professional mask reassembled itself as she stood, straightening her coat with practiced dignity. So what happens now? Are you going to foreclose if we miss a payment? Force us to include you in every holiday under threat of homelessness? That's not why I did this. Then why, Elaine? What do you actually want from us? The question echoed Martin's from days earlier. What did I want? The answer had crystallized during our conversation. I want acknowledgement, I said, rising to meet her eye to eye. Not just of my financial contribution, but of my place in this family. I've spent years making myself smaller, less demanding, easier to accommodate. And in return, I've been increasingly excluded from your lives. And buying our debt changes that how exactly? Her tone remained skeptical, but some of the hostility had faded. It ensures we have this conversation, I replied simply. It means you can no longer pretend I don't exist when it's inconvenient. To remember me. Vanessa's phone chimed with a text message. She glanced at it, then back at me. Richard's waiting in the car. He wanted to come in, but I thought... She paused. I thought it might be easier coming from me. Tell him he's welcome to join us. She shook her head. Not today. We both need to process this. She moved toward the door, then turned back. The mortgage. What are your terms? We'll discuss that after Thanksgiving, I said. As a family. Her eyebrows rose slightly. You still expect to be included in Thanksgiving after this? No, I replied. I no longer expect anything. But you should know that Lily already invited me when I picked her up from soccer practice. She was quite insistent. Something like resignation crossed Vanessa's face. Dinner's at 3, she said finally. Judith will be there with her new husband, and Richard's boss and his wife. I'll bring my cranberry sauce, I said. The less sweet version you prefer. We looked at each other for a long moment, two women who had spent years circling each other in a complex dance of power and family politics. For the first time, I felt we were seeing each other clearly, without the comfortable lies we'd both maintained. As Vanessa left, I noticed Richard in the car at the curb, watching the house with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. He didn't wave when I appeared in the doorway, but he didn't look away either. Progress of a sort. I closed the door and leaned against it, suddenly exhausted. The confrontation had gone differently than I'd imagined. Less dramatic, perhaps, but somehow more profound. Beneath Vanessa's practiced perfection and casual dismissals lay real financial fear and the exhaustion of maintaining appearances. It didn't excuse their treatment of me, but it helped explain it. When your entire life becomes a performance, family members who remember your authentic self become threatening rather than comforting. I walked to my desk and picked up the phone. Martin? It's Elaine, the mortgage acquisition. I want to proceed, but with some modifications to the terms. The Thanksgiving invitation, however reluctantly extended, created a new tension in the days that followed. I found myself performing a delicate balancing act between asserting my newly reclaimed power and not pushing Richard and Vanessa into outright resentment before we could establish a healthier relationship. I spent Friday baking pumpkin bread, to be delivered to Richard's house, a peace offering of sorts, though I recognized the irony of falling back into my familiar role of provider. Old habits were difficult to break, and part of me still believed I could bake my way back into their good graces. When I arrived with the carefully wrapped loaf, Richard answered the door, his expression guarded. "Mom," he said flatly, neither welcoming me in nor blocking my entry entirely. "I brought pumpkin bread," I said, offering the package. Lily mentioned it was still her favorite. He took it with a nod, his eyes meeting mine briefly before sliding away. Thanks. She'll appreciate that. The awkward silence that followed was new territory for us. Typically, I would have filled it with questions about his work or the children, anything to maintain the pleasant fiction of normal family dynamics. Instead, I waited, allowing the discomfort to exist between us. About Thanksgiving, he finally said. Vanessa mentioned she invited you. Is that a problem? I kept my tone neutral. He sighed, running a hand through hair that seemed grayer than I remembered. No, it's fine. Just maybe don't mention the mortgage situation in front of the other guests. My boss doesn't need to know our personal financial business. The request revealed volumes about his priorities and fears. I'm not coming to make a scene, Richard. I'm coming because I'm your mother and the children's grandmother. He nodded, though the tension didn't leave his shoulders. Right, of course. Then, with apparent effort, I'm sorry about how things have been. It's been a stressful year. The apology, however vague, was unexpected. Richard rarely acknowledged fault, a trait he'd inherited from his father. I know, I said simply. For all of us. Before the conversation could deepen, Noah appeared behind his father, eyes lighting up when he saw me. Grandma, did you bring cookies? I smiled, kneeling to his level despite my knee's protest. Even better. Pumpkin bread. With the crunchy sugar on top? Would I forget the crunchy sugar? He grinned and threw his arms around my neck in an unrestrained display of affection that children eventually learn to modulate. I held him tight, breathing in the scent of shampoo and the faint hint of Play-Doh that seemed to permanently cling to him. Over Noah's shoulder, I saw Richard watching us, something unreadable crossing his face. Perhaps recognition of what his own relationship with me had once been, before adult complications and unspoken resentments had created distance. Why don't you come in for a minute? He offered, stepping back from the doorway. Lily's at her friend's house, but she should be back soon. The invitation, however tentative, felt significant. I followed him into the kitchen, where the pumpkin bread was already being unwrapped by eager small hands. Careful, buddy. Let me cut it for you, Richard said, retrieving a knife from the drawer. As he sliced the bread, he added, almost casually, So, the mortgage thing. How exactly is that going to work? I sat at the counter bar stool, accepting the mug of coffee he offered. I'm still working through the details with Martin, but essentially, I'll hold the note, and you'll make payments. To me instead of the bank. At the same interest rate. His voice was carefully neutral, but I could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. That's one of the details we're discussing, I replied, equally careful. My priority is ensuring you and the children have stability. He set down the knife, his movements deliberate. Is it? Because from where I'm standing, it feels like you're using this to guarantee we can't cut you out anymore. The blunt assessment hung between us. In another time, I might have denied it, smoothed over the accusation with platitudes about family and support. Instead, I met his gaze directly. Would that be so wrong? To want to ensure I remain part of my grandchildren's lives? There are other ways. Are there? I interrupted, surprising us both. Because I've tried them all, Richard. I've been available whenever you needed childcare. I've provided financial support without question. I've accepted last-minute cancellations. And forgotten birthdays. I've watched myself become increasingly peripheral in your lives despite all of that. Noah, sensing the tension, quietly took his pumpkin bread to the living room, leaving us alone in the kitchen. Richard stared into his coffee. It's not that simple. It never is with family, I agreed. But at least now we're having an honest conversation about it. He looked up, a flash of the boy I'd raised visible in his troubled expression. I never meant to push you away. I know, I said softly. But intent and impact are different things. We sat in silence for a moment, the muted sounds of Noah's cartoon filtering in from the other room. For the first time in years, We weren't performing the roles of dutiful son and accommodating mother. We were simply two adults acknowledging a painful reality. "So where do we go from here?" he finally asked. "We start with Thanksgiving," I suggested. "A real family gathering, not an obligation or a performance." I hesitated, then added, "And after that, we renegotiate, not just the mortgage, but our relationship." Richard nodded slowly. "Fair enough." Then, with a hint of his old humor, "But if you could wait to foreclose until after Judith leaves, I'd appreciate it. She already thinks I'm a failure as a provider." The joke, however strained, was an olive branch. I smiled and took a sip of my coffee. "I make no promises about your mother-in-law." When Lily returned from her friend's house 20 minutes later, she bounded into the kitchen and threw her arms around me without hesitation. "Grandma, Dad said you're coming for Thanksgiving. Can you help me make place cards? Mom said I could be in charge of the table decorations this year." "I'd love to," I said, catching Richard's eye over her head. A silent agreement passed between us. Whatever complications existed in our adult relationship, we would protect the children's simple understanding of family. That evening, as I prepared for bed, I found myself unexpectedly emotional. The day's interactions had been neither a full reconciliation nor a complete failure. Instead, they represented something more nuanced, the beginning of an adjustment, an attempt to find a new equilibrium. I thought about the mortgage papers sitting in Martin's office, awaiting final signatures. They remained a tool, a way to ensure my voice couldn't be simply dismissed. But perhaps they didn't need to be a weapon. As I turned out the light, I realized the true challenge ahead wasn't securing my legal position as their creditor. It was finding a way to convert that leverage into something more sustainable, mutual respect. The kind that didn't depend on financial entanglements or obligation, but recognized the intrinsic value each of us brought to the family. The journey from invisibility to acknowledgement had begun, but the path forward remained uncertain, complicated by years of accumulated hurts and expectations on both sides. 3 days until Thanksgiving. 3 days to prepare not just cranberry sauce and dinner conversation, but my heart for whatever came next, whether healing or further fracture. I fell asleep thinking of Noah's uncomplicated affection and Lily's excitement about place cards. Sometimes, I reflected, the young ones understood the true meaning of family better than any of us adults with our complex grievances and hidden agendas. Perhaps that was where healing would begin, by remembering what the children already knew. The Tuesday before Thanksgiving, I went to Richard and Vanessa's house to help Lily with the promised place cards. The outing had been arranged with careful diplomacy. Vanessa had texted that Lily was very excited about my involvement. A thin veneer over what I suspected was relief at having one less holiday preparation to manage herself. I arrived mid-afternoon, a box of art supplies in hand. Construction paper in autumn colors, decorative scissors that cut scalloped edges, metallic markers, and small press-on gems I'd found at the craft store. Perhaps excessive for simple place cards, but I wanted to make the activity special for Lily. Vanessa answered the door in yoga pants and a loose sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, a striking contrast to her usual polished appearance. "Thanks for coming," she said, stepping back to let me in. "Lily's been talking about this all day." The house smelled of cleaning products and cinnamon, evidence of Thanksgiving preparations already underway. A stack of freshly ironed table linens sat on the entry console, and I could see boxes of rarely used china stacked on the dining room table. "Happy to help," I replied, following her inside. "Where would be the best place for us to set up?" "The kitchen island should work. I've cleared it off." She gestured vaguely toward the back of the house. "I need to run out for a few things. Richard's in his office on a call, but he should be done soon." I nodded, recognizing the barely disguised eagerness to escape my presence. "We'll be fine. How long will Lily's friend be staying?" Vanessa looked momentarily confused. Friend? Lily mentioned Emma was coming over to help with the place cards. Oh! Vanessa's expression cleared. That was canceled. Emma's family decided to leave early for their Thanksgiving trip. It's just Lily today. The information landed like a small stone. Lily had invented a friend coming over, perhaps thinking I wouldn't want to help just her, or perhaps instructed to make the invitation seem less pointed. Either way, it was another tiny bruise to collect. That's fine, I said, keeping my tone light. More craft supplies for us. Vanessa grabbed her purse and coat. I shouldn't be more than an hour. Noah's with a sitter at his playdate until 5. After she left, I found Lily in the family room watching a baking show on television. She jumped up when she saw me, her enthusiasm apparently genuine. Grandma, did you bring the sparkly stuff you promised? Absolutely, I said, setting down the box. And some extra surprises, too. We established our craft station at the kitchen island, spreading out paper and supplies. As Lily carefully wrote each family member's name in her best penmanship, I helped with the cutting and folding. She chattered happily about school and her upcoming birthday, the easy conversation of a child who hasn't yet learned to guard her thoughts. Is Grandpa watching us from heaven? She asked suddenly, carefully placing a small adhesive gem on the corner of Vanessa's mother's place card. The question caught me off guard. I like to think so, I said after a moment. He loved you very much. She nodded seriously. Dad says he was really smart about money. Not like Dad, I stilled. Your dad said that? Lily nodded, focused on aligning a gem just so. I heard him telling Mom that Grandpa would be disappointed in him, about the house and stuff. She looked up at me. Is that why you're buying our house? Because Dad made mistakes? My heart sank. Despite our best efforts, the children had absorbed more than we realized. I'm not buying your house, sweetheart. I'm just helping with some grown-up financial things. But you own it now, right? That's what Dad told Uncle Jason on the phone. Each revelation felt like peeling back another layer of a complex family dynamic. I hadn't known Richard had discussed the situation with his brother-in-law. It's complicated, I said, choosing my words carefully. But the important thing is that your home is safe. That's what families do. We help each other when things get difficult. Lily seemed satisfied with this explanation and returned to her methodical gem placement. We worked in companionable silence for a few minutes before she spoke again. Dad cried, you know, after you left on Sunday. The simple statement hit me with unexpected force. Richard, my stoic, always in control son, crying? Are you sure? Honey? She nodded solemnly. I saw him in his office. The door wasn't all the way closed. He was looking at old pictures and his shoulders were doing that shaky thing. She demonstrated with a slight trembling motion. What old pictures? I asked, though I suspected I knew. The ones from when he was little, with you and Grandpa at the lake house. The lake house. We'd rented the same cabin every summer until Richard was 12, when Robert's job change had made the tradition financially impossible. I hadn't realized Richard had kept photos from those trips, let alone that he looked at them in private moments. Mom says Dad feels guilty, Lily continued, her child's voice presenting complex adult emotions with disarming directness, about how they treat you. I took a steadying breath. Families sometimes have complicated feelings about each other, Lily. That doesn't mean we don't love each other. But you're coming for Thanksgiving now, right? Even though Mom didn't want you to at first? Each innocent revelation was another piece of a puzzle I hadn't fully understood. Yes, I'll be there. Good. She carefully placed the final gem on what I recognized as my own place card. She'd given me more decorations than anyone else. Because Mom told Aunt Claire that seeing you reminds Dad of all the stuff he hasn't done right, and that's why he avoids you. The frank assessment delivered in a child's matter-of-fact tone struck deeper than any confrontation with Richard or Vanessa could have. Here was the unvarnished truth, stripped of adult pretense. My presence triggered my son's guilt, and avoidance was easier than reconciliation. I was saved from having to respond by the sound of Richard's office door opening down the hall. Lily immediately switched topics to her science teacher's pet tarantula, her voice slightly louder than necessary, a child's transparent attempt to signal our previous conversation should remain private. Richard appeared in the kitchen doorway, his work-from-home attire of button-down shirt and sweatpants, an odd combination of professional and comfortable. "How are the place cards coming along?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral. "Great." Lily held up her creation for my place setting. "Look, Dad, I gave Grandma extra sparkles." He smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "That looks perfect, Lil." To me. "Thanks for doing this. She's been excited about it all day." "My pleasure," I replied, studying him with new awareness. Were those shadows under his eyes from stress, or evidence of the emotional moment Lily had witnessed? Had he really been looking at old vacation photos while managing his financial crisis? Richard poured himself a cup of coffee, leaning against the counter while Lily explained the color-coding system she'd developed for the place cards. I watched them interact, his gentle corrections when she misspelled a name, her eager acceptance of his input, and saw what I'd been missing before. The pattern repeated across generations. Richard had learned to look to me for approval, just as Lily now looked to him. And somewhere along the way, meeting my expectations had transformed from a source of security to a burden he couldn't bear. My support, financial, emotional, practical, had become a measuring stick against which he constantly found himself wanting. "Dad, can Grandma stay for dinner?" Lily asked suddenly. "We could have breakfast for dinner. She makes the best pancakes." Richard hesitated, glancing at me. "Mom probably has her own plans, Lily." "Actually, I'm free," I said. "But only if it's no trouble." Another beat of hesitation, then, "Sure, that would be nice." The word seemed to cost him something, though whether pride or comfort, I couldn't tell. But it was an opening, a small one, but real. As Lily gathered up the finished place cards to show me where each person would sit for Thanksgiving dinner, I caught Richard watching us, his expression a complex mixture of emotions I couldn't fully decipher. But somewhere in that blend, I thought I recognized something like longing. For simplicity, perhaps. For a time when our roles and expectations had been clearer. "You know," I said quietly when Lily dashed off to the bathroom, "Robert would have been proud of how you're handling this situation, facing it head-on instead of running from it." Richard looked startled, then skeptical. "The situation where I nearly lost our house and my mother had to bail me out? Not sure that's pride-worthy." "The situation where you're trying to protect your family while dealing with difficult circumstances," I corrected. "That's exactly what your father would have respected." He stared into his coffee cup, a muscle working in his jaw. "I've made a mess of things." "Welcome to adulthood," I said with a gentle smile. "It's a series of messes we clean up as best we can." For the first time in our recent interactions, he met my eyes directly, without defensiveness or calculation. Just raw honesty, painful but necessary. "I'm sorry, Mom. For a lot of things." 3 simple words, yet they shifted something fundamental between us. Not forgiveness exactly, that would take more time and deeper conversation, but acknowledgement. Of hurt caused and received. Of the complicated tangle of love and resentment that defined our current relationship. "I know," I said simply. "So, am I?" And in that quiet moment of mutual recognition, I glimpsed a path forward that didn't depend on mortgage leverage or holiday invitations. It required something more fundamental, the courage to see each other clearly, with all our flaws and failures, and choose connection anyway. The impromptu breakfast for dinner evolved into something I hadn't expected: a genuine family evening. Vanessa returned from her errands to find Richard and me preparing pancake batter while Lily set the table. Her momentary surprise quickly shifted to cautious acceptance. "I'll pick up Noah from his playdate," she offered, an olive branch of sorts. By the time she returned with an excited 4-year-old who was thrilled at the prospect of morning food at night, the kitchen had transformed into a scene of surprising domesticity. Richard flipped pancakes on the griddle I'd found buried in their pantry, while Lily and I sliced strawberries and bananas for toppings. "Something smells amazing," Noah declared, climbing onto a bar stool to watch the proceedings. Dinner itself was simple but heartfelt. The children doused their pancakes in maple syrup while the adults maintained more restrained toppings. Conversation flowed naturally, mostly driven by Lily and Noah's school stories, but occasionally venturing into genuinely shared reminiscences. "Remember how Dad used to make pancakes shaped like animals?" Richard asked as he cut Noah's stack into bite-sized pieces. "I tried to do it once for these two, but apparently my artistic skills aren't up to par." "Your father's specialty was the turtle," I recalled, smiling at the memory. Though his giraffe always looked more like a dinosaur, with a long neck. "I want Grandpa Turtle pancakes," Noah declared. "Well, I'm not as good as Grandpa was," I admitted, "but I could try." For the next 10 minutes, I attempted to recreate Robert's famous turtle pancakes, with mixed results. The first attempt was charitably described by Lily as maybe a turtle, who got squished a little, while the second more closely resembled its amphibian inspiration. Noah didn't seem to mind the imperfections, devouring his turtle with enthusiastic appreciation. "It's the best turtle ever," he declared loyally. After dinner, while Vanessa helped the children with baths and bedtime routines, Richard and I cleaned the kitchen. We worked in companionable silence for a while, falling into the rhythm we'd established years ago when he was still living at home. "This was nice," he said finally, handing me a rinsed plate for the dishwasher. "Almost like old times." "Yes," I agreed, "though I don't recall you being quite so adept with pancake flipping back then." He smiled, the expression reaching his eyes. "This time, Dad taught me, after I moved out. Said no man should reach 30 without mastering at least one breakfast food." The mention of Robert teaching Richard a skill after he'd left home, something I hadn't known, created a momentary pang. There were parts of their relationship I hadn't been privy to, just as there were now parts of Richard's life that existed, beyond my view. "He would have loved watching you with Lily and Noah," I said softly. "He always said you'd be a good father." Richard paused in wiping down the counter. "Did he? Even after I messed up so much in my 20s? "Especially then," I replied. "He said your mistakes would make you more patient with your own children's failures." Richard considered this, then nodded slowly. He was right, as usual. When the kitchen was clean, I gathered my purse and the leftover art supplies. "I should get going. It's getting late." Richard walked me to the door, hesitating at the threshold. "About tomorrow," Martin called. "He said the mortgage transfer will be finalized by noon." "Yes," I acknowledged. "That's the timeline we discussed." He nodded, his expression thoughtful rather than resentful. "So, by Thanksgiving, you'll officially be our landlord." "I prefer family banker," I replied with a small smile. "Family banker," he repeated, testing the phrase. "I can work with that." Then, unexpectedly, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small worn envelope. "I've been carrying this around, waiting for the right moment. Maybe there isn't one, so—" He extended it toward me. Inside was a child's drawing, faded but carefully preserved. It showed 3 stick figures, one tall with curly hair, one medium-sized, and one small, standing beside what appeared to be a house. My family was written across the top in uneven block letters. "I made this in 1st grade," Richard explained. Found it when we were clearing out Dad's desk after the funeral. He kept it all those years. The simple drawing blurred as unexpected tears filled my eyes. He was so proud of you. Always. I know that now, Richard said quietly. It took becoming a father myself to understand what that really means. Being proud of someone even when they disappoint you. Loving them not despite their flaws, but somehow including those flaws in what you love. He carefully took the drawing back, returning it to the envelope. I want you to have it. A reminder that whatever complications exist between us now, this is the foundation. It's always been the foundation. The gesture, small yet profoundly meaningful, reached past all my carefully constructed defenses. This wasn't about mortgage, notes, or holiday invitations. It was my son offering a tangible symbol of our shared history, an acknowledgement that whatever distance had grown between us, the essential connection remained. Thank you, I said, tucking the envelope carefully into my purse. I'll treasure it. As I drove home through the darkening evening, I found myself in a state of unexpected peace. Tomorrow would bring the final paperwork. Thanksgiving would follow with its potential for both healing and further hurt, and the complicated negotiation of our new family dynamics would continue. But tonight had offered something precious, a glimpse of authentic connection. Not perfect, not without its awkward moments and careful navigation of tender spots, but real. And for now, that was enough. The night before Thanksgiving, I found myself unable to sleep. Outside my bedroom window, a nearly full moon cast silver light across the garden. Robert and I had tended together for decades. The cherry tree he'd planted on our 10th anniversary stood sentinel, its bare branches etched against the night sky, like a complex network of veins, connecting, dividing, yet part of the same living system. Like family. I sat in the window seat, wrapped in Robert's old cardigan that still somehow held the faint scent of his aftershave. The mortgage documents lay beside me, officially processed and recorded. A simple folder of legal papers that represented both an ending and a beginning. Tomorrow, I would walk into Richard and Vanessa's home not as a tolerated outsider, but as something more complicated. Family member, grandmother, and now, improbably, their creditor. Power had shifted, but to what end? What did I truly hope to accomplish with this leverage I'd acquired? I picked up the child's drawing Richard had given me, studying the 3 stick figures in the yellow light of my bedside lamp. The tallest figure, me, with my curly hair, had been drawn with arms stretched wide, as if ready to embrace the world. The medium figure, Richard at 6 had already understood proportional representation, stood straight and proud. And the smallest, Richard himself, was positioned between us, one stick hand reaching toward each parent. Connected, protected, belonging. When had that changed? When had my open arms begun to feel like constraints to him rather than shelter? When had his pride in being our son transformed into a burden of expectation he couldn't bear? I thought of Lily's innocent revelations about Richard crying over old photos, about how seeing me triggered his guilt. The truth had been there all along, though I hadn't wanted to see it. My love, however well-intentioned, had become something he felt he had to earn rather than something he could simply trust. And in response to feeling his withdrawal, I had grasped tighter, tried harder, given more, only deepening the pattern that was driving us apart. The moonlight shifted as clouds passed overhead, momentarily darkening the room before brightening it again. I traced my finger over the childish drawing, feeling the indentations where a small hand had pressed crayons firmly against paper. Tomorrow would bring either healing or further fracture. The mortgage gave me a seat at the table, but what happened at that table, what words were spoken, what emotions acknowledged, would determine whether we could forge a new relationship built on mutual respect, rather than obligation and resentment. Folded the drawing carefully and placed it on my nightstand, next to the photo of Robert holding newborn Richard in the hospital. 2 generations, connected by love and blood and complicated human emotions. As I finally returned to bed, I realized something important. The mortgage was never the point. It was merely the tool that forced us to confront what we'd all been avoiding. The painful, necessary truth that real family connections cannot be maintained through obligation alone. They require honesty, boundaries, and the courage to see each other as we truly are. Tomorrow, whatever happened, there would be no more pretending. And in that truth, however uncomfortable, lay our only chance for genuine reconnection. Thanksgiving. Morning dawned clear and cold, sunlight crystallizing the frost on my garden into millions of tiny prisms. I'd been awake since 5, moving through my preparations with methodical precision. Cranberry sauce simmering on the stove, sweet potato casserole assembled and ready for baking, a bouquet of autumn flowers arranged for Richard and Vanessa's table. At 10 o'clock, my phone rang. Vanessa's name appeared on the screen. Elaine? Her voice sounded strained. I'm sorry to call so early. Is everything all right? I asked, immediately concerned. A pause, then. Richard's mother-in-law arrived. Last night instead of this morning. She's being Judith. She saw Lily's place cards and asked why you were included. My stomach tightened. I see. Richard told her about the mortgage situation. Another pause. It didn't go well. I could imagine the scene. Judith's outrage at the perceived interference, her protective stance toward her daughter, the inevitable questions about Richard's financial management. She thinks you should recuse yourself from Thanksgiving, Vanessa continued, her tone carefully neutral. To avoid making things awkward. For everyone. The request hung between us like a physical object, heavy, unavoidable. After everything, after the tentative steps toward reconciliation, I was still disposable when convenience required. In that moment, something inside me, something that had been bending and accommodating for years, finally broke. No, I said, the word emerging with surprising steadiness. No? Vanessa sounded startled. I will not recuse myself from my family's Thanksgiving to make your mother comfortable. I will not pretend I don't exist because my presence is inconvenient. Not anymore. Silence stretched across the phone line. Then, unexpectedly, Vanessa laughed. A short, startled sound that seemed to surprise even her. That's exactly what Richard... Just told her, she said, almost word for word. It took a moment to process what she was saying. Richard stood up to Judith? About me? He said either you were welcome or none of us would be having Thanksgiving at all. A new note entered Vanessa's. A voice, something like respect. I've never seen him stand up to her like that before. The revelation shifted everything. My son, my conflict-avoiding, appearance-maintaining son, had chosen me over peace with his mother-in-law, had defended my place at his table. So you're not calling to uninvite me, I clarified. No, Vanessa confirmed. I'm calling to warn you that Judith will be difficult, and to see if you could come an hour early to help me finish setting up. Strengthen numbers. The invitation, a real one this time, born of genuine need rather than obligation, landed like a gift. I'll be there, I promised. As I hung up, I felt something shift inside me, a recalibration of what mattered. The mortgage papers sitting in my desk drawer suddenly seemed less significant than the fact that my son had found his voice, had chosen family loyalty over appeasing difficult personalities. I added a bottle of good wine to my Thanksgiving offerings. Not as a peace offering, but as a celebration. Whatever happened at dinner, however uncomfortable or contentious, we had crossed an important threshold. The broken place within me didn't heal instantly. Years of feeling disposable couldn't be undone by a single moment of being chosen. But something had changed fundamentally. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I was preparing to attend a family gathering, not as a supplicant grateful for inclusion, but as an essential participant whose place was defended and affirmed. I straightened my shoulders and reached for my car keys. Whatever awaited at Richard and Vanessa's house, whatever drama Judith might bring, I was finally ready to face it as my authentic self. I arrived at Richard and Vanessa's house with my arms full of contributions and my heart racing with a strange mixture of trepidation and determination. The driveway was already crowded with cars, Judith's luxury sedan taking pride of place near the front door. Before I could even knock, the door swung open. Vanessa stood there, looking uncharacteristically frazzled, a dish towel thrown over one shoulder. "Thank God," she breathed. "Judith has opinions about the turkey." I smiled, a genuine expression rather than the placating one I'd perfected over years of family gatherings. "I'm sure she does." Vanessa took the sweet potato casserole from me, a conspirator's look passing between us. Richard's in the living room keeping her occupied. I'd suggest going straight to the kitchen. But as I stepped into the entryway, I realized I was done, sneaking around the edges of this family, done accepting the scraps of belonging offered when convenient. "Actually," I said, handing her the wine and flowers, "I think I'll say hello properly." Something like admiration flickered across Vanessa's face. "Your funeral," she muttered, but a slight smile belied the warning. I walked directly into the living room, where Richard sat on the edge of the sofa looking like a man enduring dental surgery without anesthesia. Across from him, Judith held, cord in the armchair, elegant in an expensive cashmere sweater set, her silver hair perfectly coiffed. "Elaine," Richard said, relief evident in his voice as he stood. "You're here." Judith turned, her expression a masterclass and barely concealed disapproval. "Elaine? How unexpected." "Is it?" I replied pleasantly. "I was invited weeks ago. Lily made me a place card and everything." Richard moved to my side, physically aligning himself with me in a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by his mother-in-law. "Yes." "Well," Judith sniffed. "I was just explaining to Richard that families shouldn't mix financial matters with personal ones. It's so tasteless. In another time, I would have absorbed the barb silently, retreated to the kitchen, made myself useful and invisible. Today, I set down my purse and took a seat directly across from her. "Interesting perspective," I said calmly. "Though I've found that families and finances are often inseparable, particularly when one generation helps another purchase their home." Judith's eyes narrowed. "There are appropriate and inappropriate ways to provide assistance." "Yes," I agreed. "And there are appropriate and inappropriate ways to express gratitude for that assistance." The direct challenge hung in the air. From the corner of my eye, I saw Richard straighten, bracing for the confrontation that had been brewing for years. But before Judith could respond, Lily burst into the room, wearing a sequined Thanksgiving sweater and carrying her place cards. "Grandma, you're here!" She thrust a sparkly place card into my hands. "Look, I saved you a seat next to me, far away from Great Aunt Susan who talks too much." The simple joy of her greeting, her unquestioning acceptance of my place at the table, diffused the tension. Even Judith seemed to recognize that open hostility would only diminish her in her granddaughter's eyes. "The decorations look lovely." "Lily," I said, examining the place card, "you've done a wonderful job." Lily beamed, then turned to Judith. "And yours is next to Grandpa Jim, because Mom said you two need to get to know each other better." As she skipped away, I caught Richard's eye and saw in it something I hadn't witnessed in years. Genuine, unguarded pride, not in his home or his career achievements or the image he projected, but in his daughter's innocent ability to navigate complex adult dynamics with simple human connection. "I should check on the turkey," I said, rising with newfound confidence. "Lily, want to help me in the kitchen?" As we walked out together, her small hand in mine, I felt Judith's gaze burning into my back. But for the first time, I didn't care about her judgment or approval. I had claimed my place, not through financial leverage or confrontation, but through the simple act of refusing to be diminished. The Thanksgiving dinner itself unfolded with the kind of controlled chaos typical of family gatherings where too many strong personalities occupy too little space. Richard's boss praised the turkey, while Vanessa deflected compliments to the caterer who had prepared it. Judith maintained a frigid politeness toward me, while her husband Jim, a quiet man with kind eyes, occasionally offered sympathetic glances when his wife wasn't looking. Throughout the meal, I maintained my composure, neither retreating into the background nor asserting myself unnecessarily. I was simply present, passing dishes, complimenting the food, engaging in conversation when appropriate. The mortgage situation went unmentioned, though it hovered in the background like an unacknowledged guest. After dessert, as the adults lingered over coffee and the children disappeared to play, Richard's boss Kevin leaned toward me. "Richard tells me you've helped them through a difficult financial period," he said quietly. "That's what family is for, isn't it? So, simple acknowledgement, spoken without judgment or innuendo, caught me off guard. "Yes," I replied. "That's exactly what family is for." "My mother did the same for me when I was starting out," he continued. "Never forgot it. Made sure she was taken care of in her later years." Across the table, I saw Richard watching our interaction, tension visible in the set of his shoulders. He couldn't hear the exchange, but clearly worried about what his boss might be saying, what revelations or judgments might be passing between us. "You have a good son," I told Kevin. "Robert and I were always proud of him." The tension in Richard's posture eased slightly at my words, though the wariness remained in his eyes. The strange new territory we were navigating, where power had shifted, but trust was still fragile, required careful steps from all of us. As the evening drew to a close and guests began departing, I found myself in the kitchen with Vanessa, packaging leftovers she insisted I take home. "That went better than expected," she said, sealing a container of mashed potatoes. "Yes," I agreed. "Though I think Judith may need time to adjust to the new arrangement." Vanessa's hands stilled momentarily. "The mortgage, you mean, among other things." I met her gaze directly. "My presence in your lives isn't negotiable anymore, Vanessa. Not because of financial leverage, but because I've decided I deserve better than being an occasional convenience." She absorbed this, her expression thoughtful rather than defensive. "Fair enough," she said finally. "But this goes both ways. If you're going to be a real part of our lives, you need to respect our boundaries too. No dropping by unannounced. No undermining our parenting decisions. No using the mortgage as a bargaining chip." The directness of her terms surprised me, though it shouldn't have. Vanessa had always been forthright, a quality I might have appreciated under different circumstances. "Agreed," I said. "Though I hope you'll extend the same courtesy. No last-minute cancellations. No excluding me from family events. No treating me like a backup plan when your first choice falls through." She nodded slowly. "We're negotiating a peace treaty here, aren't we?" "I prefer to think of it as establishing mutual respect," I replied. "Something long overdue." For the first time in our complicated relationship, a genuine smile, small but real, curved Vanessa's lips. "To mutual respect, then," she said, handing me the container of leftovers like a peace offering. As I drove home through the darkness, my car filled with the scent of turkey and pumpkin pie, I felt strangely unsettled despite the day's relative success. The old familiar patterns had been disrupted, but new ones had not yet solidified. We were all wandering in uncertain territory, a wilderness between the dysfunction we knew and the healthier relationship we hoped to build. I had achieved what I wanted: acknowledgement, inclusion, respect. Yet the path forward remained unclear, requiring vigilance and careful navigation. The mortgage papers in my desk drawer were both shield and sword, protection against being dismissed, but a potential weapon that could damage the fragile new. Understanding if wielded carelessly. Freedom, I was discovering, brought its own kind of wilderness, beautiful but daunting in its boundless possibilities. The week following Thanksgiving brought unseasonable warmth, a brief reprieve before winter. Fully settled in, I took advantage of the mild weather to tackle the garden beds, clearing the last of the fallen leaves and covering sensitive perennials with protective mulch. While kneeling beside Robert's favorite rosebush, I noticed a figure approaching from the sidewalk. Judith's husband, Jim, walking alone with a deliberate pace that suggested purpose rather than casual neighborhood strolling. I straightened, brushing soil from my gardening gloves. "Jim, this is unexpected," he smiled, the expression creasing his weathered face. "Hope I'm not interrupting. Judith's at her hair appointment. Thought I'd take the opportunity for a private word." Something in his tone, conspiratorial yet kind, intrigued me. "Would you like some coffee or tea?" "Coffee would be wonderful, thank you." Inside, as I prepared 2 mugs, Jim wandered my living room, pausing before the photographs arranged on the mantel. Robert in his Navy uniform, Richard's college graduation, the grandchildren at various ages. "Beautiful family," he commented. "Robert was in the service?" 20 years, I replied, handing him a steaming mug. "That's where we met, actually. I was a secretary at the base." Jim nodded appreciatively. "Air Force myself, 30 years before retiring." We settled into the living room chairs, and Jim took a thoughtful sip before speaking again. "I wanted to talk to you about the mortgage situation." My defenses immediately rose. "If Judith sent you—" "Judith doesn't know I'm here," he interrupted, gently. "And wouldn't approve if she did." I studied him with new interest. This quiet man who usually orbited Judith's forceful personality clearly had depths I hadn't recognized. 15 years ago, he continued, my son from my first marriage found himself in financial trouble. Bad investments, a divorce, some poor decisions. His mother had passed, and he had nowhere to turn. Jim's eyes held mine steadily. I bought his debt, all of it. Gave him a fresh start with one condition. He had to meet with me monthly to review his finances and decisions. The parallel to my situation with Richard was unmistakable. How did that work out? Initially? Terribly. Jim chuckled. He resented the oversight, felt infantilized, but eventually he came to appreciate having someone in his corner who cared enough to hold him accountable without judgment. And now? Now he's financially independent, runs his own successful business, and calls me every Sunday just to chat. Jim set his mug down carefully. The money created tension, yes, but it also created a structure for rebuilding trust and communication that had been damaged long before any financial issues arose. I absorbed this, recognizing the wisdom of experience in his words. Why are you telling me this? Because I saw something at Thanksgiving that reminded me of myself and my son years ago. The same mixture of resentment and gratitude, the same struggle to navigate changed power dynamics. He leaned forward slightly. And because I thought you might appreciate knowing you're not the first parent who's had to take drastic measures to maintain a meaningful connection with their child. The simple acknowledgement that my actions weren't unprecedented or inappropriate, but perhaps even necessary, lifted a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. Judith doesn't see it that way, I observed. Jim smiled again, a hint of mischief in his eyes. Judith and I disagree on many things. It's what keeps our marriage interesting after 42 years. As he rose to leave, he added casually, I've suggested to Richard that he might benefit from monthly financial meetings with you. Not as his creditor, but as someone with experience and wisdom to share. And what did he say? He's thinking about it. Jim shrugged into his coat. Give him time. Pride takes longer to heal than bank accounts. After Jim left, I remained in my chair, mulling over his words. Here was an unexpected ally. Someone who understood both sides of the complex equation I was navigating with Richard. Someone who had walked this path before and emerged with a stronger relationship on the other side. For the first time, I saw a clearer blueprint for moving forward, not just as Richard's creditor or even as his mother, but as a mentor in the fullest sense of the word. Someone who could offer guidance without control, support without suffocation. It wouldn't be easy. Decades of established patterns couldn't be rewired overnight. But Jim had shown me it was possible, with patience, consistency, and genuine respect, for the adult my son had become. 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, Richard called to arrange our first financial meeting, though he was careful to frame it as catching up over coffee. We agreed to meet at a small cafe equidistant between our homes, neutral territory that belonged to neither of us. I arrived early, selecting a corner table that offered privacy without isolation. When Richard appeared, precisely on time, I noticed subtle changes in his appearance, his suit less aggressively perfect, his expression less guarded. "Thanks for coming," he said, settling across from me with a cup of black coffee. Of course. I sipped my tea, allowing him the space to direct our conversation. He produced a leather portfolio, opening it to reveal a spreadsheet. "I've been working on restructuring our finances, cutting unnecessary expenses, creating a realistic budget." I nodded encouragingly. A good first step. Jim's been helpful, actually. Suggested some strategies from his military days. Richard hesitated. "And I've been thinking about what you said, about honesty being more important than appearances. It's taken me a lifetime to learn that lesson," I admitted. For the next hour, we examined his financial situation with a candor that would have been unimaginable months earlier. The luxury car leases being terminated, the country club membership suspended, the children's private school maintained for now, but with recognition that public options might be necessary in the future. "Vanessa's struggling with some of the changes," he confessed. "Her identity has been wrapped up in a certain lifestyle for so long." "Change is difficult," I acknowledged, "but sometimes necessary for growth." As we finished our coffee, Richard closed the portfolio and looked at me directly. "There's something else I wanted to discuss. The house." My heart tightened. "What about it?" "We're considering downsizing. Something more manageable, without such a large mortgage hanging over us." The implication was clear. My ownership of their mortgage had prompted deeper reflection about their priorities and values. It wasn't about control or punishment. It was about resetting the foundation upon which their lives were built. "I think that's wise," I said carefully. "But I hope you know there's no pressure from me. The mortgage terms are very favorable." "It's not about the terms," he replied. "It's about taking responsibility, making choices that align with what actually matters. To us, not what we think should matter." As he spoke, I realized I was witnessing something remarkable. My son's reclamation of his authentic self, separate from the success-driven persona he'd constructed. And in his journey, I glimpsed my own path forward as well. After Richard left, I remained at the cafe, watching people pass outside the window. For years, I had defined myself primarily as Richard's mother, measuring my worth by his inclusion of me in his life. My identity had narrowed to a single relationship, leaving me vulnerable when that relationship faltered. It was time to reclaim a broader sense of purpose, one that honored my role as mother and grandmother, but didn't begin and end there. Next morning, I called Margaret, my friend who had first suggested purchasing Richard's mortgage. "I need a project," I told her. "Something meaningful that uses my financial knowledge and gives back to the community." She didn't hesitate. "The women's shelter where I volunteer needs help setting up financial literacy workshops. teaching basic budgeting, credit management, investment principles, all the things Robert taught you that made your retirement so secure. Teaching other women to be financially independent, I mused. There's a certain poetic justice there. Exactly, Margaret agreed. These are women rebuilding their lives from scratch. Your experience could be invaluable. As I hung up, I felt a spark of excitement I hadn't experienced in years. This wasn't about filling empty hours or distracting myself from family tensions. It was about channeling decades of knowledge into something genuinely helpful, creating ripples of empowerment that would extend far beyond my immediate circle. Richard's mortgage payments would begin arriving the following week, the first tangible evidence of our restructured relationship. But I was beginning to understand that the most significant change wasn't his acknowledgement of financial obligation to me. It was my recognition that my value existed independently of my role in his life. I could be his mother, his creditor, his advisor, but I could also be much more. A mentor to women in need, a community volunteer, a person with skills and wisdom worth sharing. 3 months after Thanksgiving, Richard and Vanessa invited me to dinner, not at their house, but at a modest family restaurant they had discovered, near their neighborhood. "The kids love their mac and cheese," Vanessa explained over the phone, a new warmth in her voice that had developed gradually through our more frequent interactions. When I arrived, I found not just Richard and his family waiting, but Martin as well. My attorney looked unusually relaxed in casual attire, chatting amicably with Richard about local sports teams. "Mom," Richard greeted me with a quick hug, another new development in our evolving relationship. "Thanks for coming." "What's Martin doing here?" I asked quietly as we were led to our table. "You'll see," Richard replied with a small smile. Once we were seated and drinks ordered, Richard produced an envelope and slid it across the table to me. "What's this?" I asked, though I suspected from Martin's presence what it might contain. "We're selling the house," Richard announced. "The offer was accepted yesterday." I opened the envelope to find paperwork detailing the mortgage payoff amount, the full sum I had invested, plus the agreed-upon interest. "We found a smaller place," Vanessa added. 3 bedrooms instead of 5, but in a better school district. No pool to maintain, no landscaping service required. "The down payment is coming from my year-end bonus," Richard explained, "and we're financing the rest through a conventional mortgage that we can actually afford." I studied their faces, not just Richard's and Vanessa's, but the children's too. Rather than the tension or resentment I might have expected months ago, I saw something like relief. The burden of maintaining appearances had clearly weighed on all of them. "That sounds wonderful," I said sincerely. "I'm proud of you for making such a thoughtful decision." Martin cleared his throat. "I've drawn up the necessary paperwork to release the mortgage once the sale closes. Everything's in order." As the children excitedly described their new bedrooms, in the house they had toured, I reflected on the journey we had taken. What had begun as my desperate attempt to force my way back into their lives had instead catalyzed a healthier recalibration for all of us. "There's one more thing," Richard said as our food arrived. "The new house has something the current one doesn't." "What's that?" I asked. "A proper guest suite," Vanessa answered, "with its own bathroom and sitting area for extended family visits." The implication was clear and surprisingly touching. Not just a physical space for me in their new home, but a psychological one as well, deliberately included in their plans rather than accommodated as an afterthought. "We're hoping you'll help us move next month," Richard added. "And maybe stay for a while afterward. The kids would love it." "I'd be happy to," I replied, blinking back unexpected tears. "Though I've got my volunteer commitments on Tuesdays and Thursdays now." "We know," Vanessa smiled. "Lily's been telling everyone her grandmother teaches women about money." In that moment, sitting in a simple family restaurant with plastic menus and paper napkins, I realized we had indeed come full circle. Not back to where we started, but to a new beginning built on mutual respect rather than obligation. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.